Welcome to Star Canum, where we are obsessed with Star Wars Unlimited. I'm Ryan, and I'm so glad you're here because today we're talking about Padmé. I made a fun little deck with her that I brought to my local store for this week's event, and I just wanted to kind of, share my thought process on that. Okay, so here is the deck. I'm calling it Padmé's Path to Peace. As we can see, it is a command cunning deck, and before you ask or fret about it at all, no, it's not very good, but that's okay. This was the first attempt at exploring how the new coordinate mechanic works and just getting a sense of what's even possible with the card pool we now have thanks to the release of the latest set, Twilight of the Republic. Now, I really love just building new decks. Like, that is the most, maybe not the most fun part of a trading card game, but it's up there, right? Like, getting to look at new leaders and new cards and figuring out the interactions and the mechanics and finding cool, flavorful things to do and showing off all the fun stuff you've opened out of your booster packs or prize support or whatever. It's just a really cool part of the game. And so I wanted to embrace that fully by starting with a deck that was made entirely out of Twilight cards, right? Everything in here comes from the newest set. I opened 2 booster boxes, plus had some leftover packs from my pre-release kit, so between all of that, I was able to assemble what I thought was a pretty reasonable shot at this deck. Now, I only used cards that I actually own, so there's like room to have more copies of legendaries in here and some other stuff that could maybe be taken in different directions, but for using what I had, this is the list that I came up with to run at my store's event. Before we get too far into the whole list, let's go back and look at Padmé herself, though, try to understand why I wanted to start with her as my leader. And that's because she uses the coordinate mechanic, which is brand new, and I wanted to play with and get a sense for how that worked. And she cares specifically about Republic cards, which, except for a very few exceptions, they only exist in the newest set as well. So this would be a great opportunity for me to explore new mechanic and new tribe or kindred or type, as it were. So that's what I wanted to do, and I just kind of set about trying to make the best possible Republic deck that would try to go wide with a bunch of smaller units that had high health so that they would live long enough to stay coordinated so that when my heavy hitters showed up, they would be able to do their thing. And honestly, Padmé worked out pretty great. She deploys at 5 resources, which is kind of my sweet spot. I really like leaders that come out early enough that you get to use them for a couple of turns, but not so early that they're like Sabine, where their stats are kind of weaker and they're more likely to get picked off right away. Padmé has a ton of health, so she sticks around for a long time. She doesn't have a very high attack, and so your opponent kind of tends to underestimate her and ignore her, which lets her keep attacking and potentially drawing you more cards. Now, almost my entire deck is Republic cards, so I would get to pick the best out of my top 3, but I think going forward, you probably don't need a fully Republic deck to make use of Padmé. In fact, there might be times where it's better to run fewer Republic cards and just other cards that are better overall, because as you will see, I'm playing a lot of suboptimal pieces here just to keep the Republic theming, and that's probably a mistake and something that I'm going to fix going forward. For now, though, this is what I've got. So I had a single copy of Echo that I threw in here because I wasn't really sure if he was going to be good or bad or what, and it was kind of risky starting off with like a 2-cost 2/2, but when you've got Coordinate and he's just a cheap 4/4, he feels great. Maybe I should go up to a second copy of him, but I don't think you really want 3. He's definitely not your best turn 1 play, and yeah, you could probably get away with just 2. The Republic tactical officers are supposed to be like this era's wing leader or fleet lieutenant. And so I definitely wanted all 3 of those, but even though these only cost 2, you're also not playing these on turn 1. But I think these are a key part of the deck, and they certainly are the payoff for having Republic cards overall, so I will be keeping all 3 of them going forward. Next unit I have are the Coruscant Guards, which are a 3/2. And that's like a fine stat line, just vanilla. Like, I wouldn't be super embarrassed to play that. Like, it trades with a Battlefield Marine or Sabine unit or almost any of the other regular 2-drops. And this one has the upside of eventually getting ambush when it's a little bit later and you're a little bit more established on board. This guy can come in, bump out a threat that would otherwise maybe knock out one of your other key coordinate pieces. So I like the guards here. I think they serve a pretty good role in being that they can come out early and then keep your ambush stuff to apply pressure as the game goes deeper. I also have 3 copies of Padmé in here as the unit, and I don't remember ever actually drawing and playing this in any of my games at the store. But the best thing about her is that high toughness, health at 4. So she, in theory, sticks around for a couple of turns and is, again, a linchpin for keeping your coordinate numbers high enough so that you can do all the other fun coordinate stuff. She's also a Republic unit, so her leader self can find herself, which is always fun. And as for her own coordinate ability, I don't think it's particularly strong. And this is a card that I'm kind of on the fence about. I like playing a leader and their own matching unit in a deck. I just think that that's fun. But this is one that maybe doesn't quite pull its weight enough. R2-D2, however, is great. I mean, early on, you can just play him as a 2/4 and he'll just hold the line really, really well. Again, keeps your coordinate dreams alive. Later game, though, when you're holding a card that maybe isn't super useful to your situation, you play him, you discard that, you get 3 more chances to find something relevant. You don't do that too early because if he's in your opening 6, you probably already got rid of 2 things as resources, and maybe you don't want to ditch like your 3 and 4 drop that you're holding because you're expecting to curve out. So it's a little bit awkward early on. I'm also kind of surprised this R2 doesn't do this like every attack. Like his original version has a when played and attack trigger, and this one's just a one played. So he does have a decent sized body, and we can kind of build upon that for the rest of the deck. That's why he's in here. Then I've got a single copy of the Delegate. Just, again, 5 health is huge as your turn 1 play. That will take them ages to chew through. And they kind of want to because they're going to make you give back that card that you otherwise got for free off of his when played. And the longer they let him sit there, the more likely your other coordinate stuff is going to be happening. So he's kind of an interesting piece. Has like almost no offense himself, but he can still receive the buff from the Republic Tactical Officer. So I might even go up to like a 2nd or even a 3rd copy of the Senator because he surprisingly is like pretty good at just greasing the wheels and keeping this whole deck moving. And our last 2-cost unit is up in space. That's the V-Wing, which is just like a vanilla X-Wing kind of a ship. And again, it's Republic, so we need a crucial number of those in order to make the Padmé ability actually work. And you want to have some presence in space, especially if you're trying to coordinate. I find the easiest thing to do is have 2 units on the ground arena and 1 up in space and just kind of diversify a bit so your opponent can't just go all in on one lane to answer you. And this kind of, again, prolongs your coordinate numbers and keeps you alive. So you definitely need this. All total, I think I've got 14 2-cost units, which feels about right. In fact, maybe there should even be more because Padmé can find more and you could just keep playing out cheap stuff over and over. But we do need some things that are bigger for the later turns. So let's see what else we've got. Up next are the 501st guys, which are 3-cost 3/3s, and when played, if you have another Republic unit, you get to heal 3 from your own base, which is great, but I was always holding one of these like on turn 2, and I didn't want to play it yet because I felt like I was wasting the heal, but then I wouldn't be establishing my board either because I'd be trying to like do almost anything else, and like it just kind of got stuck in this awkward spot. I think between this guy and the Tactical Officer, there are some weirdly costed cards that like you need for this deck to work. Like we want the survivability of healing our base, but you don't want to play this guy so early before you've taken any damage, and you don't want to play Tactical Officer as your opening play, right? Like Fleet Lieutenant at least costs 3, so you would play like a Battlefield Marine with 2, and then next turn you play the Fleet Lieutenant and get to attack with the Marine. But it's a lot harder to sequence those things correctly. And so that's like one thing that I've now seen firsthand, how punishing it can be to like draw your opening 6 and you've got a Tactical Officer and these 501st buddies, and like you don't want to play either of those even though they are technically on curve. It's just really awkward. Over in space, though, we got the Republic Arc 170, which is great. It's just nice, solid numbers, reasonable cost. It doesn't really do anything. It has literally no abilities, But again, we need a good balance of our ships and our ground units, so I was happy almost every time I drew and got to play one of these. And then also at the 3-cost spot, I've got Republic Commandos, which also have 5 health and are just a huge wall. The coordinate ability on them is mostly flavor text. Like, I don't think it was ever really relevant. I never wanted or needed a saboteur necessarily, but it's nice to have access to. And this guy will live a long enough time to hopefully get you into the next stage of the game, which is where things start to get interesting and we actually have some better payoffs for our coordinated strategy. So at 4, we've got Shaak Ti, who is a Jedi and works with our 1 copy of General's Blade in case we go that route. Also works with our event cards, Sword and Shield Maneuver. We'll talk more about that later. Shaak Ti kind of underperformed for me. I think she would do a lot better in like a blue-green deck where maybe you've got some Sentinels, because every time I played her, my opponent would immediately take her out before she got to generate any tokens. And then any tokens I already had would get weaker because her buff goes away. So like, she definitely has a target on her and her stats aren't really good enough to survive any sort of actual combat. So you kind of need to protect her with Sentinels so she can keep attacking, and then, your opponent can't really hit her and she just keeps cranking out troops. I didn't get a chance to do that. And even though I like this card a lot, and it is a Republic card and it fits with the deck and it makes bodies, which you think you need in order to stay coordinated, she might be one of the weaker cards in here, which really surprised me as I was designing the deck. I thought for sure I would love slamming her down and getting to attack and crank out some bodies, but she just didn't live long enough to ever do that. Similarly, up at 5, the Pelta Supply Frigate. This is a card that worked great for me at the pre-release in Sealed, where the whole rhythm of that game is very different. But here in Constructed, when you start getting into the 5 and 6 cost stuff, it needs to have like an immediate impact and pretty reliably. And when I was falling behind in games, this didn't help me catch up because it only makes another trooper token if you've already hit your coordinate numbers. So on an empty board or a small board, this really doesn't do enough. And if I already had 3 units, then playing this would just give me an extra one, which is great and might help me get to victory that much faster. But like, I feel like there's probably better stuff I could be doing with 5 resources. So I think the supply frigate here might be getting swapped out for something else, but we'll see. Also at 5, I did have my 1 copy of Isla, which is great. I mean, she has good numbers, 6'5", hits pretty hard. And her coordinate ability really makes or breaks how effective she is. When she attacks, if she takes no damage, then she might get to live many, many turns. But this is another one that probably works better paired with blue and using some Sentinels to kind of prevent your opponent from attacking straight into her. Because otherwise, yeah, you get to attack and knock out their best thing, but they probably have 1 or 2 other scrappy dudes left who can get her, and then you lose like an awesome card. So finding a way to play her and protect her, especially in a deck that doesn't have ECL to get like an ambush attack out of her. You play her and she's immediately vulnerable. And again, just like Shaak Ti, she has a real target on her back, and she died like almost every time before I got a chance to actually use her. Other 5 costs, and now that I look at it, I probably had way too many 5 costs here. I probably should just lower the whole curve of this deck overall. But I ran a Clone Commander Cody just to kind of support the go wide strategy there. And really that would probably be like a second Isla if I had one, but I didn't. So he's just kind of a placeholder in that sense. But the best card in the whole deck, I think inarguably, is Plo Koon. But he would be great in a lot of decks. The fact that this one could pretty well hold, 3 bodies on board thanks to a lot of high health units. Plo Koon almost always came in, did his ambush, hit for the full 6, and allowed me to kind of stay in control of the battlefield. So he is a very strong card, and whatever this deck ends up looking like in the future, assuming it is still assuming it is still cunning and command, he will definitely be a part of it. But the rest of the shell is almost entirely up in the air at this point. The last 5 cost unit I had in here was another spaceship, and that is the Interceptor here, which is kind of understated at 5. It's only a 3/4. I was kind of thinking that the high restore amount might actually kind of make it worth, just in case I need to stay alive long enough to continue swarming over my opponent. But really, I think you want smaller, more aggressive things that trade well or have big butts so that they don't die off as easily. And this interceptor just really doesn't do either of those things great. And if we're so desperate for restore, there's probably better ways to get it cheaper or on a better statted body. So even though this is another Republic card, and I was just running as many as I could, this is one that I would probably replace with something else. And then into the high stuff, we've got the attack pod, which is like just a vanilla 6/7, but it could be played out a little cheaper on top of a coordinated board, which I thought would be good. But really, I already have so many 5-cost units, even when this was only going to cost me 5, I didn't ever need it to, because like I had something better to play. So yank this out for sure, even though like 6/7 is fine. Like it kills a lot of stuff, but it has no sentinel, no ambush. It doesn't really do anything other than just keep your Republic numbers up. And then at the very top, up in space, I ran 2 capital ships because I wasn't really sure which one would be better for my overall strategy. I thought that the Tranquility was really great. Every time I drew it, I was happy playing it, and then getting another Republic card back felt great. I mean, that's just more card advantage on top of Padmé's natural ability. So like every game, when I lost, I had like a full hand of cards. It was mostly 5 drops. And I think if I'd planned my curve out a little better, then maybe I wouldn't have gotten killed like that. But I think I would switch to a second copy of Tranquility here, because the other ship, the carrier, Republic cruiser there, was very expensive. And I was kind of expecting to see like huge battle droid armies, and this thing would come out very cheaply. But my opponent, for the most part, would usually stick to like just 2 or 3 units on board. And so it was very hard to get this thing to be cheap enough to be worth playing. And I would usually just resource it because I was like, well, the game is not going in a direction where I'm going to need a 6/7 Space Sentinel. I would rather have Tranquility hitting for 7 in space and bringing reinforcements with it. So that's an easy change to make. I think I go up to at least 2 copies of Tranquility. And then just to circle back around and talk about the events and stuff that I did run, I've got the strike package here, where it's basically Admiral Akbar but without a body. And like, that's okay. Like, you need some way to interact with your opponent's stuff. And again, I was thinking, hey, I'm trying to coordinate. I'm going to have like 3, 4, maybe 5 things out on board anyway. And this kind of becomes like potentially 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 damage for pretty cheap. And that seemed like a great thing to have. But when my opponent, wiped out my board with like a Kylo Ren unit, and then he only had like 2 or 3 health left on him, but I couldn't play a thing that would live long enough to then also play this and get damage out of it, I lost that game because I just didn't have like an actual answer to an opponent's threat. This was too dependent on my own board state and wasn't something that I was ever really happy to draw. I feel like it should probably be something else. As to what, I am still open to ideas on that. And similarly, the Sword and Shield maneuver, I mean, this is another really cool, thematic, fun card, and I'm thinking, hey, I've got some Jedi, hey, I've got some troopers here, both halves of this are going to be relevant, but by the time you're at a spot where you want to play this or can play it, you probably would rather do almost anything else with your 2 resources, right? Like, I don't want to turn Shaak Ti into a Sentinel because I'm already trying to keep her alive, and she's already taking all the damage anyway. And then my troopers, I mean, giving them raid, like, that's a nice buff for a turn, but like, there are other better ways probably to just do that. So I think I would probably cut out Sword and Shield maneuver, even though it is a Republic card, and you kind of find it with or no, it's not. It's it is. It's Jedi, Republic, and Tactics, so it works. Drop in was another event here that I don't know. I thought at 4 resources, you make 2 bodies out of it. That's good for keeping your coordinate online, and it works well with Shaak Ti, but like, it also competes with Shaak Ti because at 4, you probably just would rather play her to get her attacking as soon as possible. And then when do you have the time to play something that just makes 2 clones? This is probably something that works better in sealed or draft. Again, in constructed, all of your cards really do have to pull their own weight. And I ended up not needing this, like the Senator or Padmé or R2, any of the things with like 4 or 5 health were way more useful than like a pair of clones that would just die almost to anything. So that's something I would probably swap out as well. And then I did have 1 copy of In Defense of Camino, which again kind of rewards your whole Republic strategy here. And I never really got a chance to play this because I just had the one copy, but it is a fun card and thematic and probably one of the better payoffs if you are going to go down the Republic route. So I might keep that and give it another week and just kind of see how that fits into the next generation of this deck. So that's it. That's the Padmé deck. And like I said, I ended up only winning 1 out of my 3 matches, which was still encouraging. And when the deck performed well, it performed very, very well. I was able to stick a board that just kept growing and growing. And if my opponent wasn't ever able to like crack that egg, I just kind of kept building up, and then Plo Koon would come in and push them back down, and then Tranquility would come in, and I'd get somebody back and play them again, maybe a tactical officer, and just pour on the damage. And so when it gets going, it really snowballs into something very dangerous. On the flip side, though, when my opponent had like a Yoda deck and they were able to play Luke Skywalker and just crush my board or attack into my guys, and because I didn't have a lot of offensive power, I had trouble getting over their Sentinels or getting through their restore. Like if they had unit Yoda, he ended up being very good against me because I didn't want to kill it and feed them cards, but I couldn't leave it out there to let them keep restoring, and they just kind of created situations that were hard for this deck to deal with. Again, I didn't really have any way to answer opposing units directly. Maybe even just putting in like a waylay or something that would let me bounce stuff rather than the synchronized strike, which needs me to kill it by having my own board established first. So I think there's still some tweaking I could do, especially with the events package here, but I still got to kind of figure that stuff out. Overall, though, I do think this deck is pretty cool. I'm going to keep experimenting with it. I don't know if yellow is the right color to go with Padmé. I've been looking at some of the red cards, and maybe those are better. There are some hard-hitting red Republic cards that I think could be really cool to include here. I mean, yellow does give us Plo Koon, though, which is like super solid. So I'm kind of torn both ways, right? I also said that maybe green-blue would work better if I want to keep like Shaak Ti and Isla and just kind of sit behind some Sentinels while my board grows wider, and then I can attack, over that. I don't know. I got a couple different directions that I can take this, but I think that there are some really cool Republic cards. There's some cool payoffs. It's a fun challenge. Like it's a mini puzzle, right? To figure out how many bodies do I need to keep Coordinate alive, and what are the best payoffs for doing that? Is Echo worth running because he becomes a 2-cost 4/4? I'm not super convinced, but is Plo Koon worth running because he becomes a 5-cost 6/6 with ambush? Absolutely. But then that kind of forces me to stick to this color combo. So there's going to be a lot of iterations on this deck, and I'm excited to see where it goes. But if you've got any insight or feedback or tips that you want to share, leave them down in the comments and let me know what you think. And then make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss all the crazy adventures and exciting times we're having here on Starcanum. I really appreciate it. There's Padmé once again. So on behalf of her serving the Republic, I guess I'll say goodnight and thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.